They say pressure reveals true strength. But no one in that room ever imagined their million-dollar rescue would come from someone who wasn't even on the payroll. As the CEO watched his entire empire teeter on collapse, a quiet voice spoke. Up, a voice no one expected. She was just a janitor's daughter, yet her next words would save the entire company. The clock was ticking. Investors were waiting. The top engineers were sweating bullets, their screens flashing lines of errors they couldn't decode fast enough. Millions of dollars were on the line, along with the company's reputation. The CEO's hands trembled as he rubbed his temples, thinking it was all over. Then, from the back of the room, came a small, calm voice. At first, no one even turned around. Who would speak at a moment like this? But when they did, their eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't a programmer. It wasn't a senior technician. It was a 12-year-old girl in sneakers, jeans, and a faded backpack. Just the janitor's daughter, waiting quietly for her dad to finish mopping the floors. But what she said next changed everything. They say pressure reveals true strength. But no one in that room ever imagined their million-dollar rescue would come from someone who wasn't even on the payroll. As the CEO watched his entire empire teeter on collapse, a quiet voice spoke up, a voice no one expected. She was just a janitor's daughter. Yet her next words would save the entire company. The clock was ticking. Investors were waiting. The top engineers were sweating bullets, their screens flashing lines of errors they couldn't decode fast enough. Millions of dollars were on the line, along with the company's reputation. The CEO's hands trembled as he rubbed his temples, thinking it was all over. Then, from the back of the room, came a small, calm voice. At first, no one even turned around. Who would speak at a moment like this? But when they did, their eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't a programmer. It wasn't a senior technician. It was a 12-year-old girl in sneakers, jeans, and a faded backpack. Just the janitor's daughter. Waiting quietly for her dad to finish mopping the floors, she stepped forward, nervously clutching her phone. Excuse me, she said softly. One of the engineers snapped, "Kid, this isn't the time." But she didn't back down. She raised her chin and pointed at the screen. "Your kernel parameters are wrong. You're trying to patch the wrong sector," she said. Her fingers trembling, but her eyes sharp with clarity. Silence filled the room. The CEO looked at his chief engineer, who frowned and typed quickly, checking what she said. Within seconds, his jaw dropped. The error logs aligned perfectly with her observation. "Wait, how did you?" he whispered. She swallowed hard. "I watch my dad work all the time, but I also sit in the corner reading about computer systems. I want to build games one day, and I noticed the crash dump on the screen when I walked in." The lead engineer immediately followed her suggestion, resetting the kernel parameters and rerouting the patch. Within minutes, the system flickered back online. Dashboards glowed green. Investor data was restored. The company was saved. The CEO stood frozen, staring at the girl who'd just rescued them. Around her, men in $1,000 suits exchanged stunned looks. Finally, he cleared his throat, knelt down to her eye level, and asked gently, "What's your name?" She blushed and said quietly, "Layla." "Well, Layla," he said, smiling with tears in his eyes, "you've just saved a multi-million-dollar deal today." Her dad arrived moments later, pushing his mop bucket through the door, looking confused at the entire team surrounding his daughter. "What's going on here?" he asked. Worried, the CEO walked over to him, shook his hand firmly, and said, "Your daughter is a genius. We owe her big time." That evening, as Layla and her father walked home, he put his hand gently on her head and said, "I always told you, you're special." She smiled up at him, feeling a quiet sense of pride that words could never express. Months later, Layla was enrolled in a gifted coding program sponsored by that very company she saved. Her life changed forever. And so did theirs. Because sometimes the solution to our biggest problems isn't more money, more titles, or more power. Sometimes it's just listening to the quietest voice in the room. Remember Layla's story next. Time you're overwhelmed, genius can come from anywhere. Courage can live in silence. And the next game-changing idea might be sitting right next to you, waiting for someone to listen. As the sun set that evening, Layla sat by her bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street below. She could still hear the engineers' cheers. Echoing in her mind, still feel the warmth of her father's proud gaze. For the first time, she felt seen not as a janitor's daughter, not as a kid meant to stay silent in grown-up spaces, but as someone with a mind that mattered. Meanwhile, the executive boardroom the next morning, her story spread like wildfire. Emails circulated. Executives whispered about the little girl who saved us. But beyond the awe and relief, something deeper lingered in their minds, a humility they hadn't felt in years. That brilliance can't be bought. That true genius isn't about resumes or titles. It's about curiosity, observation, and courage to speak when no one else does. So, the next time you find yourself in a room full of people scrambling for solutions, take a moment to look around. Listen to every voice. Pay attention to the silent ones. Because within that silence, a game-changing truth might be waiting to be heard. If this story inspired you, remember, never underestimate yourself, no matter where you come from. And never underestimate the quiet person in the room, because one day, their quiet voice might just save the world. That night, as Layla drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of glowing screens and swirling lines of code, forming beautiful patterns only she could see. In her dream, she wasn't just fixing systems, she was building new worlds, creating games and designing programs that helped people everywhere. Her heart felt light. For the first time, she wasn't just a little girl watching from the shadows. She was a creator, a builder, a problem-solver. Meanwhile, the CEO sat alone in his office, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop. The deal had closed successfully. Investors were back on board. Bonuses would be paid out. But his mind wasn't on any of that. His mind was on Layla, on how easily she could have stayed silent. How close he came to losing everything because he didn't think to ask for help from someone he didn't see as qualified. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes, and whispered to himself, "How many Laylas have I overlooked in my life?" The thought sent a chill down his spine. From that day forward, the company changed its internship policy. They started outreach programs for children from underprivileged families, creating pathways into tech for kids like Layla, kids with dreams bigger than their circumstances and minds sharper than most could imagine. Years later, when Layla returned to that company as a software engineer, she walked through those glass doors with quiet confidence. She wasn't just the janitor's daughter anymore. She was the girl who saved the deal, the girl who built worlds from lines of code, the girl who reminded an entire team of powerful executives that brilliance has no title, age, or salary attached to it. And as she sat at her workstation, headphones on, typing away at her keyboard, she felt the eyes of new interns watching her. Young kids, just like she once was, seeing her not as an impossible dream, but as proof that dreams can come true. Because, in the end, the greatest systems we build aren't just programs or networks or million-dollar deals. The greatest systems we build are the ones that lift others up, that listen, that believe, that create paths for those who would otherwise remain invisible. Never forget Layla's story. In every silent observer, there may be a hidden genius. In every overlooked voice, there may be the answer you're searching for. As Layla walked home that evening, her father's gentle hand rested on her shoulder, grounding her in the warm silence between them. The streetlights flickered to life, casting golden pools of light across the cracked sidewalk. She kicked a small pebble, watching it tumble ahead. Feeling a new lightness in her chest, freedom she had never felt before. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling trees, "do you think I can really build games?" One day, her father stopped walking, turning to face her. Under the dim streetlight, his eyes glistened with tears he tried to hide. "Layla," he said softly, "you can build anything you dream of. Today proved it. You're stronger than you know." She smiled, blinking away her own tears, and hugged him tightly. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not the executives, not the money, not even the applause. All that mattered was that her father saw her, and she saw herself. Years passed, and Layla's name began appearing on patents, gaming credits, and tech magazines celebrating the youngest breakthrough developer of her generation. But if you ever asked her what her proudest moment was, she would never say it was the awards or the money. She would always smile and say, "It was the day I realized my voice mattered, even when no one was listening." Because for Layla, it wasn't just about saving a company. It was about becoming the person she was always meant to be. And for her father, it was about seeing the world finally recognize what he had always known, that his daughter was brilliant. From that day forward, Layla lived her life with a quiet determination. She studied late into the night, her little desk lamp illuminating notebooks filled with algorithms, sketches of game characters, and scribbled dreams. Whenever she felt tired or doubted herself, she remembered that room full of men in suits, and how her small voice changed everything. Her father continued to clean those glossy floors, but now he walked the halls with a lighter step. Other employees greeted him with new respect, knowing that the humble janitor was the father of the girl who saved their jobs. Some even asked about Layla, wanting updates on her journey, feeling inspired by a child they barely knew. But Layla never let their attention distract her. She knew her mission was bigger than applause. Each line of code she wrote wasn't just a command for a computer. 'Twas a message to the world. Don't ignore the quiet ones. Don't underestimate the ones you overlook. Years later, when she stood on a TED Talk stage addressing an audience of global innovators, her voice carried the same calm strength that had carried that day in the executive room. She looked out at rows of faces, many nodding eagerly, and said, "Brilliance doesn't come from privilege or titles. It comes from curiosity, from courage, from believing you can speak up even when no one is listening. I wasn't born to save a tech deal. I was born to build, to dream, to create, and so are you." The room erupted in applause, but as Layla stepped down from the stage, she spotted her father sitting in the front row, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. She smiled at him, the same way she did when she was 12, and he mouthed silently, "I'm proud of you." And in that moment, with the world at her feet and her father's love grounding her soul, she knew something for certain. Her journey had only just begun. As Layla and her father walked home that night under a sky blanketed with quiet stars, a soft breeze rustled the trees along the sidewalk. She looked up at him and saw his eyes glimmer in the faint moonlight, filled with silent pride. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. In that stillness, there was a language only their hearts understood, a language of sacrifice, of dreams, of endless love. When they reached their small apartment, Layla sat by her window, gazing at the blinking city lights in the distance. She thought of all the people who didn't hear her before, all the rooms she had been invisible in, and she smiled, because she knew now that it didn't matter who saw her or who ignored her. What mattered was that she saw herself, that she believed in her mind, her voice, her dreams. Somewhere in the building, a television hummed with news of failing stocks, new deals, powerful CEOs reshaping the world. But Layla closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet night, "One day, I'll build a world where every quiet voice is heard. And in that whisper was a promise to herself, to her father, and to every child like her. A promise that brilliance would never again be hidden behind janitors' doors or overlooked in silent corners. Because Layla wasn't just a genius who saved a company. She was proof that the most powerful minds often come wrapped in the smallest, quietest packages. So remember this, wherever you are listening from tonight, the world may overlook you. People may dismiss your dreams, but your mind is yours. Your brilliance is yours. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Create, even if no one is watching, because someday your quiet courage will echo louder than you ever imagined. Months passed, and the seasons changed. Winter melted into spring, and with it came new beginnings. Layla spent her days buried in books and coding tutorials, scribbling ideas in worn-out notebooks, her handwriting slanting with quiet urgency. Her father often watched her from the doorway, mop in hand, his tired eyes softening every time they landed on her determined little face. One evening, as she struggled with a complex algorithm, frustration building in her chest, her father walked in and placed a steaming cup of tea on her desk. She looked up at him, tears pooling in her eyes. "I can't figure this out, Dad," she whispered, shakily. "What if I'm not as smart as they think I am?" He knelt beside her and gently placed his calloused hand over hers. "Layla," he said, his voice deep and steady, "being smart isn't about always knowing the answer. It's about never giving up until you find it. You've always had that strength. Don't let doubt steal it from you." She nodded, wiping her tears, and turned back to her laptop. That night, she solved the problem, smiling at the glowing screen with relief and pride. In the darkness of their small apartment, a single light burned into the night, a beacon of her unstoppable determination. Years later, Layla stood before a crowd of young girls at a coding camp she created. As she looked into their bright eyes, she saw herself reflected back, hopeful, curious, sometimes scared, but always brave. She spoke softly into the microphone, her voice steady and kind. "When I was your age," she began, "no one expected me to understand computers. No one listened when I spoke up. But that didn't stop me from learning. It didn't stop me from trying. And one day, my voice saved a company." The girls sat in stunned silence, their eyes wide with wonder. Layla smiled gently and continued, "Your voice matters. Your mind matters. Even if no one listens today, keep learning, keep building, keep believing. Because the world will need your brilliance sooner than you think." The room erupted in applause, and as she stepped off the stage, her father, now retired, stood waiting in the wings. His hair was whiter, his back more bent, but his eyes still shone with the same pride as the day his little girl saved the company. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." He smiled, tears rolling down his cheeks, and said, "Thank you for showing the world what I always knew." And as they walked out into the golden light of the setting sun, Layla knew her journey wasn't just about computers or coding. It was about hope. It was about courage. It was about making sure every silent voice had a chance to be heard. Because sometimes, the smallest voices carry the world's greatest truths. In the years that followed, Layla's name became known in tech circles around the world. Her innovative programs changed the way people learned to code, opening doors for children in villages, small towns, and crowded city schools, places where no one believed programmers could come from. Her platforms were simple, playful, and beautifully designed with empathy, making technology less intimidating and more human. But despite her success, Layla always carried one memory closest to her heart. That day in the boardroom when her quiet voice broke through chaos, when no one expected her to speak, let alone save the entire company. She would often sit by her window at night, sipping tea, thinking about how everything could have turned out differently if she hadn't spoken up, if fear had won, if doubt had kept her silent. Her father, now older and enjoying his garden each morning, would still call her every evening. They spoke about everything: her work, his tomatoes, the news, the stars. And every time before hanging up, he would say the same words: "I'm proud of you, Layla, always." One evening, after speaking at an international conference, Layla stood by her hotel window, looking down at the endless city lights flickering below like scattered galaxies. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I was never just the janitor's daughter. I was always me." And that was enough. Far below, in a quiet street, a young girl with her father walked home from his night shift. The girl looked up at the towering skyscrapers glowing against the velvet sky. She held her father's hand tightly and said, "Daddy, do you think I can ever work up there one day?" He squeezed her hand and smiled softly. "You can work wherever you want, my love. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Because somewhere, in every city, in every small town, there is a Layla, a quiet, brilliant child whose voice can save worlds if only someone listens. And as long as Layla's story is told, there will always be hope that brilliance will never again be hidden in silence." Years later, when Layla had built her own Campania place where curiosity was celebrated and quiet voices were nurtured, she hung a small framed photo on her office wall. It wasn't of her awards or newspaper headlines. It was a simple picture of her and her father, taken the day she graduated with honors in computer science. In the photo, her father's janitor uniform was wrinkled and his hands were still rough from years of cleaning floors. But his smile was brighter than any golden trophy. Every morning, as Layla sipped her coffee and planned her day, she looked at that photo and remembered who she was. She remembered that brilliance isn't measured by what the world gives you, it's measured by what you do with what little you have. One rainy afternoon, she was invited back to the company she once saved. As she stood in their polished boardroom, the same place where her journey began, she noticed a plaque hanging near the server room. It read, "In honor of Layla, whose courage and brilliance saved us when we needed it most. May we always listen to every voice." She smiled softly, running her fingers across the engraved letters. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of quiet triumph. Tears of a girl who grew into a woman and never forgot where she came from. Before leaving, she paused by the janitor's closet, now repainted and organized, and thought of her father. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for every night you came home tired but still told me stories. For every morning you told me I was brilliant before the world ever saw it." Outside, as the rain fell gently, Layla walked to her car, her reflection rippling in puddles under the gray sky. She didn't see the CEO rushing past or the executives checking their watches. She saw the little girl she used to be standing quietly, eyes wide with wonder, ready to speak up despite her fear. And in that moment, she promised herself that, no matter how far she climbed, she would always bend down to lift another quiet voice into the light. Because, in the end, it wasn't just about saving a tech deal. It was about building a world where no brilliance is ever silenced again. As Layla drove away from the company headquarters that day, the rain turned into a gentle drizzle, blurring the city lights into watercolor streaks on her windshield. Drove slowly, the hum of the tires on the wet road harmonizing with her thoughts. Memories played like quiet films in her mind. The terrified little girl clutching her backpack, the stunned faces of engineers, her father's proud tears, her first line of working code, her first employee hired, her first game launched to teach coding to children like her. When she reached home, she sat in her car for a moment, listening to the rain tapping softly on the roof. She closed her eyes and took a deep, peaceful breath. Her phone buzzed with messages, emails, invitations, and congratulations. But for now, she ignored them all. She simply sat there, feeling the warmth of gratitude fill her chest. Inside, her small apartment was still the same, simple, clean, filled with books and quietness. She placed her keys on the table, brewed herself a cup of tea, and sat by her window, watching the city lights flicker against the velvet night. Somewhere out there, she knew, was another child like her, sitting silently in a room full of adults, dreaming of worlds bigger than anyone could imagine. She raised her cup to the dark sky and whispered softly, "Keep going. Speak up. Your voice matters. I promise, one day, the world will listen." And in that silent prayer lay her greatest legacy, not the awards, not the companies, not the wealth or recognition. Her true legacy was a trail of hope she left behind for others to follow. A trail that whispered to every child, every quiet thinker, every overlooked dreamer, "You are brilliant. You are worthy. You are needed." Because in the end, Layla knew one truth deeper than any line of code. The world does not change through power or wealth. It changes through small voices. With big courage, the days turned into years, and Layla's influence reached places she had never even visited. Children in remote villages learned to code through her programs. Single mothers studied at night, their laptops glowing softly as they learned skills that would transform their families' futures. Refugee camps saw classrooms light up with hope as her simple coding games unlocked creativity in young minds who had known only loss and displacement. Yet, even as her name appeared on magazine covers and award lists, Layla kept her life simple. She still brewed her tea the same way each morning. She still called her father every evening. She still sat by her window at night, looking up at the moon, remembering the little girl who once waited quietly for her janitor father to finish mopping the floors. One evening, while hosting a workshop for young girls in tech, Layla noticed a shy child sitting at the back of the room, hugging her backpack tightly to her chest. She walked over, knelt beside her, and asked gently, "What's your name?" The girl whispered, "Amira." Layla smiled. "Amira, do you like computers?" Amira nodded quickly but lowered her eyes. "But my mom says people like us can't do things like this." Layla felt a lump rise in her throat. She took Amira's small hand in hers and said softly, "Do you know what my father did when I was your age?" Amira shook her head, her eyes wide with curiosity. "He was a janitor," Layla said. "People thought I couldn't do this either, but here I am, and you know why?" Amira shook her head again, tears brimming in her eyes. "Because it doesn't matter where you come from," Layla said, her voice strong yet gentle. "What matters is that you keep learning, keep trying, and never stop believing that your mind is powerful." "I believe in you, Amira. Will you believe in yourself too?" Amira's tears spilled over as she nodded slowly, a tiny spark of hope igniting in her chest. Later that night, as Layla packed up her laptop, she looked back at the room full of young girls and smiled. She knew she would never meet most of them again, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that they left that room feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling powerful, because Layla had learned one eternal truth. Legacy is not what you build for yourself. Legacy is what you awaken in others. Years later, when Layla was invited to speak at a global innovation summit, she stood on a vast stage under dazzling lights, facing thousands of leaders, thinkers, and creators from every corner of the world. Her heart pounded softly in her chest, not from fear, but from gratitude. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she thought of Amira, of her father, of that little girl who once waited silently in a boardroom, unnoticed and unseen. She took a deep breath and spoke. "I am not here today because I am special. I am here because someone once listened to my quiet voice, because someone believed in my brilliance before I even believed in it myself. And now, I carry that responsibility forward to see the unseen, to hear the unheard, to lift voices that were never meant to stay silent. The room fell into a deep, reverent silence, every person listening with their hearts as well as their ears. And I want you to remember this, Layla continued, her voice calm and unwavering. True power is not in how many people listen to you. True power is in how many people you choose to listen to. Because the next world-changing idea, the next life-saving innovation, the next quiet genius could be sitting right beside you. Don't let their brilliance fade away because you were too busy to hear them. As she stepped off the stage, thunderous applause erupted, echoing through the auditorium. But for Layla, the real applause came later, in the quiet messages from young girls around the world who wrote to say, "Because of you, I believe in myself." That night, she sat by her window once more, sipping her tea as the city glowed under a million flickering lights. She closed her eyes and whispered softly into the darkness, "Thank you, little Layla, for being brave enough to speak." This story teaches us that true brilliance and solutions can come from anyone, no matter their age, background, or social status. Layla was just a janitor's daughter, someone no one expected to have knowledge or power. Yet, in a moment of crisis, she saved an entire company because she was brave enough to speak up. And because she believed in what she knew. The deeper lesson is, never underestimate quiet people. Listen to every voice, even those society overlooks. Your circumstances do not define your potential. Courage is speaking up even when you're scared. Legacy is not what you achieve for yourself, but what you awaken in others.